the crop yields produced on dark earths are so good that it is now widely regarded as the most fertile soil in the world.
But the other thing is that those soils are very stable, and that's what's so fascinating about the terras pretas as well, because one problem with contemporary agriculture in the tropics is that one has to put a lot of fertilizers, and very fast, after 2 or 3 years, those fertilizers are washed away by the rain. Terra preta soils, they don't lose their nutrients. They're very stable for over hundreds of years.
And wherever terra preta is found, there is evidence of human occupation going back centuries, often in the form of broken ceramics, which archaeologists call pot shards.
The amount of potsherds that one sees on the surface and also buried on the sites is really, it's huge. We find evidence of houses, of fences, of structures, of platform mounds for the building of the houses. We have evidence of food processing on those places as well. Sometimes we dug cemeteries, people being buried there. So to me they represent the ancient settlements of people who lived in the Amazon in the past.
The most remarkable thing about this miracle soil is that ancient people didn't just use the terra preta, they created it. And we know that because in the southern Amazon, people like the Cuicuru tribe are still creating dark earths today.
Então essa terra preta está sendo produzido naturalmente. Nosso lixo orgânico sempre jogado no interior das aldeias, assim, no interior das casas, atrás das casas. Quando passa 3 anos, a terra começa a ficar preta, né? Quando planta as coisas ali, cresce bem lá.
So what had seemed impossible had already been done. Indigenous peoples had transformed the one thing that everyone thought would have prevented the development of large civilizations in the Amazon. And there was yet another striking revelation to come from the dark earths. It was to do with the accounts left by Orellana in his search for the legendary cities of gold.
The very interesting thing is that this description of the cities stretching over many miles down the main Amazon River, these cities coincide perfectly with the main distribution of terra preta black earth soils.
We find terra preta sites in places where he traveled, and we find that his description of the pottery, which he compares of the finest pottery made in Malaga, really matches the color and the patterns of the pottery that we find. Also, he talks about palisades, fences around villages, and we've dug structures like that. So I think it's a very good, I think it's very close to reality. He wasn't making that up.
It was becoming clear that the so-called virgin rainforest had in fact once been home to a substantial population.
And we know through the archaeology that the areas adjacent to the floodplain were full of people. We have sites from the headwaters of the Amazon to the mouth of the Amazon. So most people today work with the hypothesis that there were like around 5.5 million people in the Amazon by the time of the arrival of the Europeans.
450 years after it was written, Orellana's account was finally vindicated. Far from being a fantastical traveller's tale, it is now widely accepted as historical record. Most of Orellana's observations were made close to the Amazon River. But archaeologists are now looking further afield for clues to the rainforest's pre-Columbian past. In the 1990s, at the heart of the largest indigenous reserve in the Amazon, Michael Heckenberger began to piece together a picture of the communities that thrived at the time of Orellana's voyage.
What I was really interested in looking at was their deep history. I wanted to work with them on their oral history and particularly the archaeology of previous communities extending back, hopefully into pre-Columbian time. And within weeks of arriving in the Kwikudu village, the Kwikudu chief showed me an ancient archaeological site, which we now know dates to just about the time Europeans first arrived in the Americas, and it was over 10 times the size of the Kwikudu village.
Since then, Heckenberger has collaborated with the Kwikuru on a series of archaeological digs to find out much more about these ancient settlements.
And it was elaborated with earthen structures, including ditches and palisade walls, curbed roads, a large curbed plaza, and an occupation area that extends over 50 hectares. Over the past couple of decades, we've been able to map dozens of sites, many of them that large. So in the area where I went to live in 1993 with the Kwikudu, who were living in one village, in 1500, there was 24 villages, many of which were 5 or 10 times as large.
When the ancient earth structures were mapped out, a pattern began to emerge.
The Shinguanus are well known for living around a large circular plaza, a ring of houses which has a clubhouse in the middle. That same plaza organization was the central feature of ancient communities. They were 10 times larger. There was many more people. But that same kind of circular plaza village oriented the ancient communities.
And when Heckenberger and his team found the remains of ancient roads, it became clear that these sites indicated something more than the isolated settlements of today's Amazon.
We've mapped archaeological roads with GPS. Based on that mapping, what we've done is extrapolated the directions of those roads across the landscape. And to our surprise, they actually link up with other archaeological sites. And so the entire region was organized almost like a lattice work of roads, north to south and east to west. Sounds very urban.
Heckenberger was revealing a highly planned pre-Columbian settlement pattern, unlike anything that had existed in the old world.
They were integrated in these multi-centric clusters. They always had a single central community. They had 2 major satellites, one to the south, one to the north, 2 other major satellites to the east and west. And those 5 communities formed a core area. And it's this multi-centric form of urbanism that's really quite novel. We haven't seen anything similar to that anywhere else on the planet. It's an alternative form of urbanism. But in terms of integration, regional design and planning, in many respects they were more complex than the ancient Grecian polis or the medieval towns and villages.
The next stage was to get an idea of the extent of these settlements across the region. In doing this, the